Elusive Truth with Rich and sometimes Larry. All jokes aside, it's not on purpose. It's been a crazy month for everybody involved, and we're just trying to do the best we can. So, with that, welcome, and I hope you're all doing well. I know my last podcast was a little bit more of doom and gloom. That's what the media and everything was portraying with everything. And thank goodness that Putin isn't as bad as they made him out to be. I'm still sure he's a bad man, but we haven't had any nuclear incidents yet, and let's hope we stay that way. Now, coming up, again, we were talking about crazy month. Well, here we go. We're going to start off with the piece on Arizona with Dr. Steve Turley. He's talking about the election issues that are plaguing Arizona, especially Maricopa County. It was just one of the things that made the elections, I guess, interesting to say the least. But here, have a listen. He'll explain it way better than I ever could. He'll give you a better idea. At least it gave me a better idea of what's actually happening in Arizona.
The Attorney General of Arizona has announced that the Arizona 2022 election cannot be certified until Maricopa election officials explain what happened with the numerous polling fails on Election Day. We're going to look at the latest coming out of Maricopa County, and we're going to see precisely why Kari Lake continues to fight not just for the governor's mansion, but for the integrity of voters everywhere. You're not going to want to miss this. Kari Lake is insisting today that she will indeed become governor of Arizona after the state's attorney general's office announced that they could not certify the final results of the election in view of the host of election day problems that beset voters. The Arizona attorney general's office has sent an official letter to the Maricopa County attorney's office demanding explanations for the myriad of election issues that were reported to election officials that raised significant questions as to the county's compliance with state election law. In view of the widespread admission among election officials that there were indeed significant problems with the voting, the Attorney General's office is demanding the following. First, a full list of the voting locations that had problems with either ballot-on-demand printers or tabulation. Second, they want the specific problems at each voting location listed out. Third, any other issues related to ballot-on-demand printers and or tabulators. Fourth, a comprehensive log of all changes to the ballot-on-demand printer configuration settings. Next, a full list of the various technical specifications that were used for the printing, the precise time non-uniform printer configuration settings were found to be the root cause of the problem, and the exact method used to update or reconfigure the printer configuration settings at each voting location, and when did they make the changes at each voting location. So obviously, this is a very detailed investigation that the Arizona Attorney General's office is conducting in terms of its initial inquiry into, frankly, what the hell happened on Election Day. And the key here, at least as of the making of this video, the key here is that the Attorney General's office is stating that they will not certify the election results as is. Now, where that goes, we're going to have to see. But Kari Lake's campaign remains in full swing. Check out the video that she retweeted today of a fellow by the name of Matt Baker, who stood up to Maricopa County officials. Check this out.
Good morning. Once again, the eyes of the world are upon Maricopa County for another botched election. Am I here to accuse you of stealing the vote? Heavens no, for that would make me a terrorist, wouldn't it? Let me ask you, if you took your life savings to a bank and the teller put them in a machine and the machine kicked out 1 out of 4 of your bills and the teller said, "Don't worry, we'll put them in box 3 over here and we'll let you know how many were in there later. We'll send them off to a separate location and someone will be sure to get back to you and tell you how much money you have." Would you be okay with that? No, you would not be okay with that. Now ask yourself the question, which is more valuable, your vote or your money? Now ask a lobbyist that same question. Now ask a campaign manager that question. Now ask Mark Zuckerberg that question. Which is more valuable, your money or your vote or your country or this world or the corruption that is taking over every single county in this nation? And then you look into your own soul and you look back at yourself in the mirror and realize that you are the cancer that is tearing this nation apart. Good day.
Wow. Now that is some fantastic political oratory. God bless that man. Beautifully said. And as Carrie Lake noted in her retweet of that speech, that's basically the sentiment of millions upon millions of voters in Maricopa County and frankly around the nation. All right, Laura Logan is reporting that other Arizona counties like Yavapai and Gila are refusing to certify their election results as well as of today until there is an accounting for what happened in Maricopa County. And of course, this all goes back to the utterly absurd refusal by Katie Hobbs to recuse herself as the current Secretary of State from overseeing an election that would entail her counting the votes of her opponent. That itself was how all of this absurdity began, and it's obviously only gone downhill from there. At the very least, the Lake campaign is calling for an election redo in Maricopa County. She just tweeted out, quote, "If a premise is false, you don't have to accept the conclusion. The same goes for elections. When you lose by 1% and 7% of your voters are disenfranchised, you don't just shrug your shoulders and move on. You demand a satisfactory remedy for all parties involved." And this, to me, is what makes Carrie so awesome. She refuses to just, sit back and go the way of the legacy media calling the elections without so much of a hint of concern for admitted voting issues throughout Arizona's most populous county. Those issues need to be addressed and fully accounted for as an integral part of any state certification process in accordance with their election law. And that's exactly what Carrie is demanding here. And of course, in the face of the same old tired lamestream media accusations of election denial and the rest of the nonsense, again, coming from every single news outlet that pushed for over 3 years the conspiracy theory that Vladimir Putin stole the 2016 election and that Hunter Biden's laptop was nothing more than Russian disinformation right before the 2020 election. So we'll obviously keep a very, very close eye on how things develop over the course of the next week or so in Maricopa County. We're certainly rooting for Carrie Lake, but even more so, we're rooting for election integrity.
I certainly hope this helps the outcome of the election there. I'm rooting for Carrie Lake. And if she doesn't win, fine, but there's too much tomfoolery going on, and it's much more complicated than we're allowed to know at this point. Moving along, I found this a little bit from Fox Business. Larry Kudlow is talking about the economy and the future. Have a listen.
Hello, folks. Welcome to Kudlow. I'm Larry Kudlow. So I know we're coming into Thanksgiving, and it's truly one of my favorite holidays. And Thanksgiving is the quintessential American history story, celebrating the first harvest of our earliest settlers. It's a very inspiring and optimistic tale. One of the reasons I love it is that history is so optimistic. And I'm an optimistic person who always believes in the greatest of the soul of the founding of the United States, America. But I have to depart from this optimistic script for just a little bit, talking about the economy. I got to tell you, I see a number of important indicators that are all pointing to recession. I don't like this, but that's what I'm looking at. We may already be in a recession, but next year looks like an even deeper downturn. Now, there's a way out of this mess, and I'm going to get to that in a few moments. But first, some straightforward empirical factoids. I begin with a huge drop in the Conference Board's leading economic indicator. This is a very old-fashioned series, but it is a highly accurate forecasting tool. It's got interest rate spreads and consumer expectations and manufacturing and stock prices and building permits for new homes and other measures. There are 10 in all, and as you can see by the chart, the rate of change is absolutely plunging. Second, maybe a more controversial indicator called M2, which is an inadequate measure of the nation's money supply, but still something to pay attention to. It was pioneered by the great Nobel Prize winner Milton Friedman. This is a monetary interpretation of the economy, and it tells us about future inflation and growth. You can see by this chart that for 20 years, M2 is basically growing modestly. That had something to do with a 2% average inflation. Not everything, but something to do with low inflation. And then we come to the craziness of the last 2 years with a massive increase in federal spending that led to an equally massive money printing by the Federal Reserve. This was the single biggest mistake by Joe Biden. It moved the inflation rate up from about 1% to nearly 10%. Because of that, real wages have fallen 18 consecutive months. That is the soft underbelly of the Biden economy. And now, as the Fed makes its belated correction for its own prior mistakes, the American economy is in great jeopardy. This all could have been avoided, but it wasn't avoided. And now here we are with the threat of a difficult downturn next year. One that probably began this year, but Milton Friedman argued that inflation is too much money chasing too few goods, and oversimplifying a bit, Uncle Sam created the money, and then overregulation, tax increases, and of course the war against fossil fuel production all created tall barriers to the production of goods. Yes, we had a COVID supply chain hangover. Yes, there's Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine. But the bulk of this economic mess, homegrown, based on the policies of big government socialism and central planning on a grand scale. Besides the leading indicators in the money supply, just to add one more, the bond market has turned upside down on its head, with short-term interest rates now much higher than long-term rates. It's a very useful recession forecasting model that was developed years ago at the New York Fed and has a very high degree of accuracy. Basically, when the 3-month T-bill exceeds the yield on the 10-year Treasury bond, the probability of recession 1 year hence goes higher and higher. Right now, the 3-month bill is 4.30 and the 10-year is 3.80. This is a very alarming sign. Now, there are a lot of other indicators I could point to. Big housing downturn, major slowdown in manufacturing. I don't want to get any deeper in the weeds than I have to. No model is perfect, but I will suggest that keeping an eye on the leading economic indicators and M2 and the Treasury yield curve gives everybody a pretty decent sense of where we are headed. So inflation will come down slowly, but the recession may be very difficult. Again, ever the optimist, we should be able to do a lot better in the future regarding economic policy than we have done in the last 2 years. You've heard this before from me. But first, we should immediately open the spigots to produce more oil and gas, allow permitting and pipelining and refining. All that would reduce prices, promote jobs, and economic growth. John Kerry's COP27 Green New Deal socialist redistribution climate reparations scheme, he's trying to bribe poor countries not to use oil and gas, is just dumber than dumb. Joe Biden closing down coal plants all across America, dumber than dumb. New EPA regs and taxes on clean-burning natural gas, even dumber than dumb, if such a dumbness is possible. Then we need to reimpose workfare and work requirements on able-bodied people receiving government assistance. Okay? This succeeded 25 years ago in reducing welfare spending and ultimately led to a balanced budget. Also, we need to make Donald Trump's supply-side business tax cuts permanent. Then we need to rein in the Biden regulatory assault on all businesses, a policy that has literally strangled the economy. At the end of the day, we've had less money chasing more goods under those policies, less money chasing more goods. Inflation would crash. The economy would soar. We've done this in the past, and we can do it in the future. It's time to act like stewards of economic prosperity. Let us replace utopian socialist schemes that always cause recession and impoverishment wherever they are implemented. I know we can right this ship. And I will say, Happy Thanksgiving. Gobble, gobble, gobble. And that's my riff.
Now, isn't it nice when news actually starts reporting news and something that we can actually believe in? So there you have it. Keep prepared. It's still going to be a rough ride for this economy. And next, let's talk about, how about demons? I got a quick little thing from Sid Roth, the supernatural, the demon goddess Astaroth. Weird stuff, but it's amazing how more and more demonology is coming into play in 2022.
She had a priesthood. Her priests, listen to this, in her temples, they were men who dressed up as women. And they acted as women dressed up. So what's going to happen if she comes back? What's going to happen is, as she possesses a culture, is that men will start dressing. We'll start seeing that in our culture, which we do. These are her ancient priesthood. Also, they were involved in same-sex sexuality. We see that explosion as well. Also, it says, remember, she says she turns men into women, transitions them, and women into men. Many of her priests were actually surgically altered. She caused them to be surgically altered.
I never knew that.
Yes.
I thought that was just something of our gen.
Well, we do it more sophisticated, but she especially, all the gods, but they go after the children. Because if you have the children, you have the future. And so that happened in ancient times, happening now. And so you think, what would possess an adult to do this to children? Well, what would possess it? The spirit. The spirit of the goddess.
Isn't that crazy how they can relate that stuff to the Bible and way back when? All this craziness with these people. The more you look into it, the crazier it gets. And for my next segment is from JRE and the Family. Joe Rogan, Glenn Hancock, and Randall Carlson. They're going to be talking about the new study to map the DMT realm, which touches a lot of what we kind of just heard in a way. Anyway, have a listen.
Of course, the mainstream attitude, this is just rubbish, this is just your brain on drugs. Well, Imperial College, they're now testing that view. And what they're finding is that and something else, DMT, as I'm sure you know, Joe, is a very short-acting experience when you smoke it. It's about 12 minutes, maybe less. You're in there, you're plunged into a completely convincing, sometimes terrifying parallel reality. It's so confusing, you hardly know what's going on, and then you're out again. But you come out with a feeling that something's been downloaded to you. In Imperial College, they found a way to keep people in the peak state of DMT for an hour. They're delivering it through drip, through timed release, and they're keeping the volunteers in an hour in that state. So they have time to find their way around the DMT realm that they find themselves in. And the astonishing thing is that these volunteers, both men and women, are all coming back with accounts of meeting the same entities and the same world. And it has to raise the question, and I know Rick Strassman has been on your show, and kudos to Rick Strassman because he was really the first scientist to work with DMT and human volunteers at the University of New Mexico. Rick Strassman is open to the idea that what happens with DMT is that it alters the receiver wavelength of the brain and that it allows us to gain access to other realities, that these encounters are not unreal, that they're real, but they're real on a level that we can't experience in a day-to-day state of consciousness. We have to be in an altered state of consciousness in order to experience them. And ultimately, the aim of this project is to map the DMT realm. You know, we talk a lot about extraterrestrials and ETs and making contact, and I'm sure the universe is filled with life, and it would be a very good thing to have the tech to make contact, or perhaps not a good thing, with all those other life forms in the universe. But right there in the DMT experience, inside our own heads, we have the opportunity to encounter another world, another realm, entities who are very different from ourselves and who have teachings to give us. And I think we should be spending a lot more research funds on exploring those experiences and finding out what's going on, rather than zooming off to other planets. Let's do both, but let's make sure that we understand that the consciousness is an enormous mystery, and at the level of consciousness, DMT opens up literally a parallel world. And there's a nexus here with quantum physics, and with the notion of parallel realms and parallel realities. Maybe we can actually access them. Well, the work at Imperial College ultimately is going to come up with some answers on that.
And so much more cost effective.
So much more cost effective.
Traveling to other galaxies.
Yeah. I mean, let's do that first.
Yeah.
Let's understand what we are. Let's understand what our consciousness is. Let's not just keep locked in this, we're here to produce, we're here to consume, we're here to buy cars. Sure, we're here, those are all part of our life today, but it's not all of us. We're much more mysterious, much deeper creatures than that. And psychedelics offer a doorway into another way of exploring human consciousness. And when we do that, we find that there are unseen realities all around us that can be made visible in a deeply altered state of consciousness. And yes, in terms of research funds, it's so much cheaper than trying to, fly off to Mars or wherever. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm just saying that if we're going to do that, we need to explore the mystery of consciousness. And if we're going to if we're seriously going to engage with the ET abduction phenomenon, with extraterrestrial, so-called extraterrestrials encounters, we must recognize that fundamental to this is consciousness. It's not just physical contact. There's consciousness is involved. I wrote a book back in 2005 called Supernatural Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind. And it is astonishing, Joe, how encounters that were described as encounters with elves and fairies in the Middle Ages, encounters that shamans to this day describe as encounters with spirits, that all the characteristics of those encounters apply to encounters with so-called extraterrestrials today. It's as though in each generation, each civilization, we construe experiences according to our cultural background. So they called them fairies and elves in the Middle Ages. Shamans called them spirits. We call them ETs today. But if we're really going to crack this problem, and it is a problem, and it is a mystery, I'm not dismissing it, it's a very important mystery. If we're going to crack it, we're going to have to use psychedelics to explore the mysteries of consciousness.
Yeah, I'm very excited that the attitudes about this stuff from the general public, people are much more open-minded now than ever before.
Yeah.
I mean, ever in my lifetime. I remember discussing with people doing DMT in the early 2000s, and people are like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah, exactly.
What, are you crazy?
Exactly.
And now almost everybody and their cousin has a story about, trying ayahuasca or doing psilocybin or having some sort of an experience with peyote.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very very widespread, and I would say it's part of an overall change in our society, which is extremely healthy, which is the change of just accepting what the experts tell us. Oh, a scientist said this, so it must be true. We're starting to think for ourselves, and we're not willing any longer to be told what to think. We're wanting to find out for ourselves. And that attitude has very much affected the way that people relate to psychedelics. And when people explore the psychedelic experience in a responsible way, and psychedelics are very serious business. You and I both know this. They're very, very serious business. I would not encourage children to take psychedelics. But actually, if we want to keep children away from psychedelics, it would be far better to make them legal than leave them illegal and available on the black market. I think it's something for the mature mind. But I regard it as a fundamental human right of adults to be able to explore our unconsciousness so long as we do no harm to others. And I see this attitude spreading much more widely in society. What the hell is that guy in a suit? What right has he got to tell me how I treat my own health or how I treat my own consciousness? So long as I do no harm to others, that is entirely my business and nobody else's.
Agreed. And if this is the source of civilization, or one of the reasons why people were able to think so creatively and create these incredible structures thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, this all does coincide with this work about these apocalyptic scenarios that you guys are talking about, because if we don't have an understanding of how we got to where we were, and we also don't have an understanding that this can happen to us again, it's very possible for us to happen again.
It's indeed possible for it to happen again. And in the 8th episode of Ancient Apocalypse, one of the scientists from the Comet Research Group makes that point, that the comet that disintegrated, that caused so much damage on Earth 12,800 years ago, its debris stream is still in orbit. The Earth passes through it twice a year. And in the next 30 years, we're going to be passing through a very lumpy bit of this 30 million kilometer wide debris stream that's called the Taurid meteor stream. We should be paying much more attention to that, because it's not doom and gloom.
I never thought in a million years they would try to be mapping out the DMT realm. I mean, it just proves that there's a lot more to this world, this universe, than meets the eye. And they kind of go along with this. I have End of Times with Justin Fall and Wes Fall. Declassified documents reveal fallen angels. Crazy biblical stuff that ties everything back up and around in a nice, neat little bow. Something for you to think about. It's really intense. So, once again, have a listen.
It's completely classified. It's top secret. It's under lock and key. But I want to mention something. One of the bombshells that we dropped was that there's a declassified federal document. Anyone watching this interview can go find this document. It's on the FBI vault. Document 6751. It's a document from the 40s. It was written by a prominent member of academia, and it was submitted to the FBI. In this document, they make a case that entities are not space aliens, but that they're interdimensional or extra-dimensional entities that are crossing over from a plane known as the ethereal plane. Now, we know, as researchers of the New Age movement, we know that that is where the ascended masters are supposedly said to be on a high level. This ethereal plane is very popular. When you talk to people who astral project, people who channel, people who remote view, people who want to tap in or go on a trip, an ayahuasca trip, a DMT trip.
Ayahuasca, different trips, DMT, that does allow you to cross over, or allows a person to cross over into those dimensions. Outside of that, the satanic ritual has proven to be the most effective. And from the research that we've done, the people that we've interviewed, that seems to be the constant. That's like it's a guarantee you're going to make contact if you do this.
Now, the federal government had this document in the 40s, and language was used in this document that came right out of the playbook of Theosophy. Now, the guy that received this document, this is so crazy. The federal agent receives a document, and look, the FBI is constantly bombarded with phone calls and letters and emails, and they just can't deal with all of the propaganda from citizens. People make stuff up, and it's just it's nothing. It's crying wolf. So the FBI has to really be careful what they accept and what they don't. But this was back in the 40s. So the guy that receives a document, he recognizes that this information was received through paranormal means. As a matter of fact, the language used in the 40s was super normal. That's the old way of saying paranormal, super normal. So he says that all of this information was received through supernormal means, therefore we need to discount it. It's not valid information. Now that's the headline that he put. It's like a cover letter. If he really believed that, why did they classify the document? Why did they classify it and then forward it to all of these FBI prominent members at the highest level of security clearance? Why in the world would they classify it and lock it up if they didn't believe it? It wasn't until years later that they declassified document 6751. And I read this document and I'm thinking, okay, since the 40s, the federal government at the highest levels have known that these are not space aliens, that these are entities coming from another dimension.
In the scripture, you have the chariots that are mentioned, God's transport, basically, and it ripping through the space-time from the spiritual into the natural. I think that's basically the same thing that we're dealing with the UFOs. And because of the different deals that they've made with the governments, with the sharing of their technology, in order for them to have a safe space of being able to do whatever they do in the deep underground military bases. I think that some of the ones that you're seeing today are going to be basically the government taking that information and creating their own spacecraft. The technology that Standea was working on with anti-gravity craft, I think it follows along the same thing. You can go back to the Nazis with the Die Glocke and different things like that they made, which also they were highly involved with the occult. They didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to try this, this, and this. There was a basis. They went in there and they performed rituals to get the information to be able to practice that.
When you talk to someone who has worked in a deep underground military base, which we've interviewed people, they talk about different classes of entities. None of that is really mentioned in 6751. It's more so an overall summarization of what's going on. Now, there were some information about traveling through the dimensions. There's some very fascinating tidbits in this document. And we don't really go too deep into the document other than referencing it in the film, because we had to go through, we've got over 300 declassified documents in our collection right now, all pertaining to aliens, UFOs, extrasensory perception, psychic activity that they're training people to operate in. The federal government has been training people in the occult since the 40s. Training them in how to operate in occult magic and occult sciences. Everything our Bible tells us is absolutely forbidden. Our federal government has been a part of this since the 40s. And I want to add, back in the 40s, they still promoted the idea of a Christian nation of America. Yet behind the scenes, it just goes to show that the people in charge of our government have been pacifying the society since the beginning. And I don't understand how people could be so blinded. We present the information. This is what they said in the 40s, and it's only gotten worse over the years. Now, let me just draw us into this other area real fast. This group, the Collins Elite, they really wanted to create, how can I put this? They wanted to create some type of resistance. Non-aggressive, of course. Non-aggressive resistance. That's what I understand that from my studies. That's what I believe. They wanted a non-aggressive resistance to what was taking place, because they saw that when a man or a group of men began to communicate with these entities, the hunger for power gets greater and greater and greater. And then you're no longer trying to get answers. You're now wanting to ask them to give you blessings. You're now getting technology and information from these entities, and you're utilizing it in the way that you structure your government moving forward. And you would say, well, why would these entities need the government? It's not a matter of them needing the government. It's a matter of setting up the scene for the end times deception where the Antichrist is going to unite the governments of the world. It's all part of their long game. They've been working on this since the beginning of time. It didn't work at the Tower of Babel. The Lord ended it quickly, but here we are today. Where are we today, and what happened between then and now? Well, what we find out is that one of our contacts, Stan Deyo, who, by the way, Tom Horn gave us a great endorsement of Stan Deyo. Tom Horn, before his house burned down years ago, he had this big newspaper article from the UK, and standing on the cover with these other elite doctors and scientists, it's Stan Deyo. And they're giving him credit in the UK, public knowledge, that he's working on anti-gravity craft. Now, the film that we did called The Hollow Earth Chronicles, we did a whole segment in that film on Operation High Jump. This was a joint task force between the American government, the British government, and the Australian government, headed by the US and Admiral Byrd. They go down to Antarctica in what turns into a UFO battle. And their big plan got cut in half, and they had to come home early because we lost men, we lost ships. There's stories of UFOs coming up out of the water and just cutting ships in half with laser. I mean, just crazy stuff that you only see in movies. What's fascinating about this is that this was a joint task force with those same three governments that are now working together with Stan Deyo, the British, the American, and the Australians, working together on alien technology yet again. Years after Operation High Jump happened, Stan Deyo was working as a secret agent for the FBI in Australia inside of the deep underground military bases. And he said while he was in the program, he knew about the deal with Eisenhower. He knew in the program that President Eisenhower had made a deal with what they called alien entities. I believe that the evidence points to two events taking place, and these two events happened 1 year apart. The first one happened at Edwards Air Force Base, where Eisenhower disappears, and they call it a media blackout. It was kind of similar to when Hillary Clinton and President Obama disappeared and were at the Bilderberg meeting, but nobody knew where they were, and it was called the media blackout. People freaked out, right? Well, something similar happened here, where Eisenhower is no longer on radar, and they come back later and say, oh, well, he had a dental emergency, and so he had to go seek private dental care. Now, that happened, and then a year later, we have the Holloman Air Force Base event. Now, the thing about the Holloman event was that people were there who witnessed it. Holloman is where they were out on the landing strip, and you had UFOs landing, meeting with him. Meeting took place with Eisenhower and others, and then those UFOs took off. Now, there were eyewitnesses who have come forward. I was just talking about this with Chad Riley because he found some videotapes from the 90s This is before the internet was doing its thing. In the 90s, there were videos that were recorded, old VHS tapes of some of these disclosure type engagements. I don't know what you want to call it, but these are men that were there. They're decorated men from the government, and they're now speaking out that yes, UFOs were landing and taking off at Holloman Air Force Base, and I believe it was 1955. We do know that things began to be more apparent after Babylon working, and therefore there were more things taking place where there was people seeking the entity. So what I believe happened was that the rift was open, the tear in the space-time continuum, if you will, a portal, Stargate was opened, and the government got involved. The feds got involved. Once they began to communicate with the entities, there was now a relationship being built, and it was no longer shock value that there are these entities who want to work with us. So I think that was definitely an open door, no pun intended, for those entities to now be communicating with President Eisenhower years later, not too many years later, but a few years later. They're now meeting with Eisenhower. And so the story goes like this. We're on the road trip. We're driving out to meet with Ray Boucher, who was contacted by the Department of Defense. This is really important. This is one of those like haymakers. The information that he gives us that he presented his full disclosure in our film Higher Entities. But we're driving there and we're having a discussion, and we decided let's just go ahead and let's run some cameras, while we're driving and talking. So we set up our production stuff in Darren's SUV. We're driving down the road, and we have this conversation about this Eisenhower deal. See, what I had heard and researched was a little different than what Darren had picked up in his research. And this is one of those scenes in the movie where it's just like, wow, like the stuff that came out was so organic and unbelievable. Apparently, there were two events that happened, and a lot of people blur them. A lot of people will mix it up with the Edwards Air Force Base and the Holloman. They're two separate events a year apart. That's so important. But the idea is that the gray aliens on record met with Eisenhower. And then you had this other group of entities known as like the Tall Whites or the Nordics. They met with Eisenhower separately, and they warned him. They said, you do not ever want to make a deal with the gray aliens. They are deceptive. They are very deceptive. All they want to do is deceive you and enslave you. They're demonic, basically. I don't think they use the word demonic, right? Because they're all demonic. But they were warning Eisenhower never to enter into a covenant with the Greys. Well, they were the good guys, the Greys were the bad guys. This is fascinating because if you fast forward into this idea of a coming deception, they had to already set the groundwork to create a good alien, good cop, bad cop. Because what we're dealing with here is a bunch of liars. Satan's a liar, his demons are liars. That's why when someone starts playing with a Ouija board, their grandmother starts talking to them. Well, it's not your grandmother, bro. Yeah. That's a demon. Yeah. That's an entity who wants to deceive you. Sure. They want to steal, to kill, and to destroy. That's biblical. And we're also told as Christians, we got to be vigilant and we got to be sober-minded because Satan is our adversary. And the word Satan, the name Satan isn't really a name. We have this misconception that Satan, the devil, the red pitchfork. And in reality, Ha-Satan is the enemy, the adversary. And so when we say Satan, it could actually be referring to the whole class, team of demons and entities, fallen angels. And so what we have is we have the fallen angels. And now it's my personal belief. Let me just lay this out real quick. It's my personal belief based on the book of Revelation and based on me using a calculator and understanding some definitions. I was able to calculate that if a third of the angels fell with Lucifer, with Satan, the Satan, right? If a third of them fell with him, and that's also based on another passage of a third of the stars getting knocked down to earth. If that passage means what we think it means, and if we understand it correctly, a third of the angels fell with Satan. And you can do your math and figure out that equals somewhere between 30 to 50 plus million fallen angels on the surface of the earth. Now, out of that, some of them were put in chains. The Bible tells us this because the ones that committed sexual sin, the Genesis 6, they have been locked up in chains. We can read about this in Jude. But the ones that are not locked in chains, just think about it, 30 to 50 plus million fallen angels on the face of the earth. I made the comment recently in an interview I did that is more than the population of the largest state in America.
These are the ones who have been worshipped throughout time. These are the ones of the nations who they set up the groves and the high places and offered sacrifices to them. They've been presenting themselves to humanity throughout time under different names, but under the same descriptions of their characteristics. So when you look at it in those kind of terms, and to also answer your question about are they otherworldly or interdimensional, through the document 6751, we did find that back in the 40s even, they were saying that they were interdimensional beings. Wow. So that will parallel with what Scripture has to say of fallen angels. With Job, for instance, you have Job, and this kind of is a crossover between our first film, Hollow Earth Chronicles, and the latest Higher Entities. But in Job, you have, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. So on one hand, you have him being able to present himself before the Lord, but he also is able to, and that's the spiritual realm. That's the things that we can't access. There's a barrier that's been put in place. But Satan and these divine beings, with the divine council, they were able to hold an audience before the Lord. At the same time, Satan says here that he's allowed, or that he's been going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. So that's an interdimensional feat. In Philippians 2:8, and I got that here. Wherefore God also hath highly exalted him, speaking of Christ, and given him a name which is above every name. So that's an authority. That at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow, every knee should bow, of things in heaven and things in earth and things under the earth. And that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So just a couple things on that. First, it shows that that these places actually exist. So you've got things in heaven, things in earth, and things under the earth. Those are three physical locations, and call them spiritual locations because we can't access the one or the other until we're completed. But it also shows, and most importantly, it shows that Jesus has all the authority. It's all been given to him because of what he's done. And so every tongue is going to confess at one point or another that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. He's been exalted above everything. Everything's under his authority. So there's nothing to fear. Thank God we've been given his word to study it. And I wish I would have started earlier, man. Like one of the things I tell people that are, earlier on their walks, I wish I would have started reading the scripture on a daily basis. Because that's where our foundation comes from. That's the basic instruction before leaving Earth. It's our map. He gave us this so we wouldn't be lost. It documents the whole story. Yeah. And so there's nothing to fear. It's amazing. If we're in Christ, we're sealed until that day.
Amen. Well, what'd you think? This episode had everything in it, from politics to economics, to demons and spacemen. Larry would be proud to be listening to this one. Anyway, we wish Larry well. Hopefully we'll get him back on the next episode here. He is recovering, and on top of that, he had to deal with the death of his father a couple weeks ago. He's in Wisconsin taking care of family business, but he'll be back. He's got a lot to say. I know he's been trying to say a lot. But as we all know, life is crazy these days. So with that, I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. And remember, the elusive truth is out there. Keep looking for it. We love you all. God bless you all. And peace be with you. That's all we have. Peace and love. So take care, and we'll talk to you real soon. Have a good day.